Hi, my name is Tingaud. Nowadays, I work in static code analysis. Originally, I majored in bioinformatics. I was in a class of 15. 14 people were passionate about biology, and they had heard that programming might be an interesting tool. I was passionate about programming, and I had heard that biology might be an interesting domain to apply programming to. And some days, this difference between me and my colleagues was obvious. For example, I remember this time where the teacher gave us, we had spreadsheets, and the teacher was guiding us through some experiment. At some point, the teacher said, okay, you have 100 entries in this spreadsheet. Count how many of them have a value higher than 80 on current age. And 14 people around me pointing at their screen and started counting lines one by one. I was like, that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to write down a formula and get the result automatically. At the time, I felt like I knew how it was supposed to be done, and they were wrong. But in retrospect, I don't think they were wrong. Since I would always write down the formula to count 100 lines in a spreadsheet. But if you do not know how to write a formula, and a teacher is waiting for you to answer the question, and you have just 100 entries, which is not that much, counting by hands really makes sense. That was probably one of my first encounter with the value of automating or not, depending on what you know and the context. Nowadays, I work in static code analysis at Sonar. Who knows Sonar Cube, Sonar Cloud, Sonar Lint? Okay, for the others, we do static code analysis in the CI and in the IDE. We try to detect bad patterns and warn you about them. And I try to come up with this rule in C++ of stuff you shouldn't do and try to detect them with matchers. And because C++ is quite complex, when we have a matcher, we try to test it against a ton of C++ code that might be different ways to do the same error. And because C++ is very complicated and we have tons of C++ to test against a matcher, and we end up with this test where you have a ton of C++ plus what we expect to find in it. It's pretty hard to read. So I wanted to create some kind of plugin in my IDE that would show me where a change is going to happen, where a warning is going to happen, that I called the decorator. I worked on that with a colleague, and it worked very well. So well that we started adding features, and because we had many features, we started needing tests for the decorator. And because we had tests, we added a CI on top of that. And because we had a CI and test, we added a GitHub action. I had many ideas to improve the GitHub action, but I stopped because we were working on the GitHub action that automates the CI, that automatically runs a test, that automatically tests a decorator that I will put in my IDE to decorate a test that is going to test a plugin that I'm going to give you so that you put it on your CI for your test for your own code. It's automation all the way down, and no matter where you look, you have automations below you, and you have ideas of new automation to put on top of that. And sometimes we are creating real value. You are improving the life of everybody by doing an automation, but sometimes I'm just getting sidetracked. Sometimes it's very interesting to automate something, but it doesn't bring any value for whatever value, meaning of value you have. And so that's my question today. When is it worth the time automating something? And when are we just getting sidetracked and doing something else than what we should be doing? The good thing with a technical presentation is that there is always an HTTP commit that answers the question or supports your point. So presenting HTCD 1205. It's okay if you cannot read. I'm going to describe it quickly. On one axis is how many times do you do the same task. On the other axis is how much time could you shave off from this task by automating it. And so in each cell is how much time you can spend automating before you spend more time automating than you're going to shave off in the next 5 years, which is a reasonable range, I think, to take into consideration. So this whole chart is actually just saying that it is worth automating if and only if we save more time than we spend writing down the automation, which is a nice, easy way to word it, which is also a formula that I completely disagree with. It would be okay for me to disagree with one HTCD commit, but many people in our industry seems to think like that. Like, if you are not shaving off more time than you spend automating, it's not worth it. I think the real formula is that it's worth automating if your benefits are higher than your costs. Thank you for coming to my talk. Have a nice day. Okay. Yes, the problem is that we didn't answer anything by answering this specific question. I would be interested in hearing if some of you have ideas of benefits and costs that are not just the time spent and the time saved, which are definitely important benefits and costs to count. But do you have other ideas? Not forget to do something. Yes, like this one. Complexity, you mean it's easier to automate than do manually, or opposite? It's a cost because it's too complex.
It's a cost. If you get too complex, then you drown in everything.
So you would rather say scaling, perhaps? No?
I mean, basically, if you have many different things you automate, you might lose sight of everything.
Okay. So if you, okay. So if it's too complex to automate and you start automating everything, it's like this one too. Maintenance cost, yes.
You have to take into account the amount of time it costs you fixing, doing it wrong by mistake.
Yes. So the manual errors have to be counted. I love it because my whole talk is getting laid out. Yes?
Yeah, if your automation is extendable or reusable, you can save the time on other things.
Okay, yeah. So you can reuse the same automation for other stuff if it's, yeah.
How long the job might last for? It's only one time, or do you want to do it?
Yes. Is it a one-shot thing or not? Sorry for the camera. It's probably not ideal. Do you want me to give you the mic next time? And okay.
You can just repeat them from the front end.
I did repeat them. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah. Anyway, now I'm going to show you mine, which I think all those you mentioned are in the slides, so I'm glad for that. So I'm starting with the benefits because I'm an optimistic person. And yes, I think one of the elephants in the room is by automating, you avoid manual errors. My classmates in my story at the beginning, counting on the screen 100 lines, I'm sure some of them missed a line or counted the same line twice. This does not happen if you automate. I work in static code analysis. I know that copy-paste errors are like, it's enough for us to get a job, just copy-paste errors. And typos will happen if you write enough code. By the way, if you disagree with one of the slides, or if you want to add something, don't hesitate to raise your hand. I kind of thought this talk as something quite interactive. And I know that some of them are a bit, can be disputed. So, no manual errors. Also the fact that you can rerun for free. And we mentioned earlier whether it's run once or if the task needs to be done multiple times. Even if the task is one shot, with the air quotes, it happened to me so many times in the past that I think I'm doing a one-shot change where I change A into B. I do it, and the next day I realized that actually I wasn't supposed to change all A into B because some of the A was supposed to be changed into C. If I did that manually, that means I will need to revert everything and redo the task manually because I was slightly wrong on what I was trying to do. With automation, I just revert, rerun the script, slightly change to change some of the usage of A into C. It's almost free on the second try of this one-shot change. So even one shot, I think, we still gain something of being able to rerun them once. It will also happen that you change everything in the master branch, and some user was working on their side, and they didn't have the change yet, and they were using A everywhere. You can also give them the script, and they are able to have the change on their side too. Manually, they will need to do the same work as you. Which, talking about branches, brings us to the next one for me, reaching a moving target. So I have this big repository. I want to change all usage of A into usages of B. So I branch it. I work all week long, changing usage of A to usage of B. At the end of the week, I try to rebase on the main branch of the project. And everybody has been introducing new usage of A because the world continued turning while I was working. So now I have conflicts to solve. And if I'm lucky, it's going to converge. At some time, I'm changing more usage of A into usage of B than people are introducing, so I will converge, hopefully. If I go on vacation, if the team is very big and is introducing a lot of changes, we can be in one of those scenarios where we actually diverge and they introduce more problems than I solve at once. With automation, this does not exist at all. You take as long as you want to write down the automation. Once you're done, you press a button. It's almost instantaneous, and you change for the whole world. So you don't have this feeling of trying to empty a sinking boat with a small cup, like a Looney Tune. Understanding the process. If my task is complex and takes multiple days of doing multiple stuff, by automating, I am forced to get this high-level vision of everything that's happening. I am forced to get the big picture, and I am also forced to to make every exception explicit. And that process will give you, on top of the automation, it gives you some knowledge, which is extremely valuable. And this knowledge that is extremely valuable, on top of that, you can share it with your colleagues. The HTCD commit at the beginning was only talking about, was based on the idea that you are the only one doing the task, which might not be the truth. If you have newcomers in your team, they need to learn how to do the task. Manually, it might be very long and complex for them. With an automation, you give them the automation that can run the script immediately. It works perfect. If they need to understand what's happening behind, this automation is probably something that they can look into and understand what's happening. Which I'm not saying that code is a good documentation by itself and you should not document. I'm just saying, in that kind of case, it's an interesting base to learn about something. I think this one was mentioned before with modularity. You were thinking about doing very clean code, which is very nice. I do it slightly differently. I have this big project where we put a ton of files and text files, and we try to have something quite homogeneous, but by adding checks and stuff on top. And at some point, we wanted to change the format, so I wrote a very dirty Python script that would do it automatically. And perhaps it took me more time to write this Python script than do it manually. But I wanted to. I'm very bad with Python, so it was an occasion to learn, etc. It worked. 2 weeks later, I needed to change the format again. I took this Python script that was supposed to be one shot. I changed 5 lines, rerun it, and it did the new change to the format that I needed to do. So by having an automation around that I had written for one shot, I actually had not a library, but something that I could reuse and reduce the time I had to spend on this task a lot. I also perhaps became slightly less bad at Python, but not that much. I think this one is the most important benefit, in my opinion. If you are trying to, if you have this task that is not super important, not super urgent, it is probably the best sandbox you could have to learn a new technology. You are trying to do a tiny thing that will be used only once. The scope is very small, so it's a good case to learn a new technology. The risk is very limited. If it doesn't work out, you can still do the task manually. You can still fall back on something you know to automate it again. And I say limited commitment. I mean, like, even if you don't follow the best practices because you are learning this new technology, you don't know yet the best practices, it's okay. Like, worst case scenario, you're gonna drop the code and rewrite it again another time. Best case scenario, it works and you're good. So it's really a very good sandbox to learn this kind of small, kind of one-shot changes. Another way to learn about a new technology is toy projects. But I think automations are a best sandbox because with toy projects, first, it's very hard to do it on company time. Telling your boss, yeah, I'm not doing anything useful this afternoon, but it's because I'm learning a new technology. It might not go well. Often when I do a toy project and it doesn't work, like the technology doesn't really do what I want, I'm always left with this question of, is it because the technology is bad, or is it because what I'm trying to do is not a real life thing and nobody's trying to do that anyway? So I don't know. And with the toy project, you end up, as I said, with kind of nothing in the end. With the automation, you end up with something useful and you've solved the actual problem in the meantime. So I really love automations as a way to learn new technologies. Another one that I love is changing behaviors, which is kind of on the other hand of the spectrum. It's not when it's something that is completely useless, but when Gutenberg invented the printing press, he did not shave off 1 year out of a monk's work time. He completely changed society. And yes, probably my automation is not going to change society, but I have seen, for example, teams. I have seen a team, they had a very, very complex release process. It took them 2 days every quarter to release their product. And it was super painful, so every time they would change who was doing it, because they all hated doing it. At some point, the dev lead got fed up with this problem and said, okay, we're going to automate. And the whole team worked on automating for probably quite a long time, until they ended up with a one-liner. This didn't shave off 2 days of work every quarter for them, because with a one-liner, they put it in the CI, and they started doing continuous delivery. And now they started having feedback from their users almost immediately on anything they were merging. So by automating something that was not very often done, they completely changed the behavior of the whole team and the way they worked for the better. So this doesn't happen every day when you automate stuff, but I think this is a winning lottery ticket that you will have once in a while, which is really worth betting on automations. And all of these were very interesting for your team and your company, but sometimes you have to be a bit selfish too. Doing something manually with a lot of repetition, it can be extremely boring. And if you always press the same keys over and over and over again, you can even end up with repetitive strain injuries. Personally, even if it takes a little bit more time to automate than to do that kind of stuff and end up with an injury, I will automate. Automating is fun. It's an interesting problem to solve. You have this new technology you're about to learn about. And sometimes you are doing something pretty hard in your everyday job, and you need a change of pace. And switching to something like that, it's fun. You do it for 2 hours. You go back on your task, and you feel a bit refreshed. So it can be useful for that too. I am a C++ developer. When I do a small feature, it takes me 3 days. With an automation, I can have the idea in the morning, and by lunchtime, I'm done doing the automation. I can share it with my colleague, and they are happy because I just solved the problem for them, so they are grateful. So my colleagues are grateful. I'm happy because I finished something in a very short time. Everybody is happy, and we all love automations. Do you see any other benefits I didn't mention? So now, on the bad part, the cost. Obviously, you are not doing any manual error anymore with automation. Congratulations, now you can do bugs. And you can do bugs at scale. That's a great thing with an automation. And you can do bugs at scale in 2 ways. You can create 1 million files with 1 million errors, which is bad. And you can create 1 million files with 1 error in one of them, which is way worse, which is the real power of automation. Having 1 error in 1 million files, because your reviewers will have to do sampling to review the 1 million file. And if you're not lucky, they're not going to choose the one where there is this error. By the way, I'm listing all the costs of automating. I'm not offering any solution to any of this. So that one is on you. Higher uncertainty. A manual task repeated very often is very, very predictable on how much time it's going to take you. And writing down an automation, especially if you don't know the technology, not so much. We all know that we should multiply what we think is going to happen by 2, and that way we are just going to be wrong by half. But yes, this is a presentation not with 1 HTCD commit, but 2. So the HTCD 1319 is showing the process of automation as you think it's going to happen and as it actually happens. You expect to change your task, you spend a bit of energy to automate it, and then you have all this free time because you no longer have to do it manually. And in real time, you start writing some code. When you start running it, you realize there is a bug, so you debug it. Then you realize the bug is there because you didn't think it through well enough, so you start thinking again and implementing this new solution and debug the new solution, etc. And you end up with no time to actually do the manual task at all. Of course, this is a caricature. Of course, we are not doing that. Who knows about the sunken cost fallacy? It's this thing that this problem in the wiring of our own brains, which makes it that you're not going to say that if you don't say that something failed, it didn't really fail. If you do not accept a failure, there is no failure. So for companies, it will be like, yes, we invested billions in this project and it's still not done. We are not going to give up now. That would mean that the billions were lost. We are going to put more money in it. And this time, probably it's going to work. And for you, it means saying, oh, I already invested 1 week to shave off 2 hours out of my time. If I stop now, everything has been lost. If I continue, perhaps it's going to work. And no, it doesn't. So you have at some point to just let go and say, okay, I spent too much time on this automation. It was super exciting. I didn't get the result, but I'm stopping now. Otherwise, you end up with the HTTP commit. Automation are very good to do exactly the same thing over and over again, which means you are introducing rigidity into what you are automating. You are introducing rigidity into the task itself. You are also adding some rigidity on the whole stack. For example, if you want to move from Linux to macOS, perhaps you will have to rewrite all your scripts that were doing stuff automatically. What you were doing manually is still going to work perfectly. And you also add rigidity on exceptions or stuff that happens only once in a while. If you spend a lot of time automating how your agile process works, and you thought about like, okay, every 2 weeks, we have a retrospective of the sprints that we spent, etc. It might be very nice, but perhaps in December, when 3/4 of your team are off, you want to do a 3-week sprint. And now your automation is making it super hard to have a 3-week sprint when everybody is in vacations. So because you automated, you made everything else a little bit more painful. Tooling fatigue, which was mentioned with the complexity and everything, I think, or at least that's how I interpret it. If you start having multiple automations, and you give everybody around you all these automations that do this and that and that, at some point, it's just too much. People have too many tools. They forget half of them. They don't know very well how to use the ones they know about. And you're just wasting time for everybody. And I say multiple tools, but I've also been in companies where you have one tool with 20 tabs, and each tab has 4 buttons which do completely different stuff. It's exactly the same. People do not know about all the features. They are not using them. And so when you want to automate, you have to automate what you think is really useful for everybody. The rest, you can automate for yourself, but probably not share it. Opportunity cost. It's very nice to spend some time now to shave off some time in 5 years, like STCD was putting it. Thing is, perhaps in 2 weeks, you have something very important happening. A very big demo for your startup. A product is getting out of the door. In that case, investing some energy to shave off time in 5 years, if you don't even know if the startup will still be there, is not a good usage of your time. So you should always consider whether you could be doing something more useful at the time. And in my opinion, we should always consider whether we could do something more useful. That doesn't mean we should always do something more useful during the time. You consider it, and then if you decide that you still want to automate, go on. Because, for example, in a startup, perhaps you are always in an emergency for something and something else, and you still need to have some automation at some point. So you will have to pay this opportunity cost. Just be aware of it when you pay it. Maintenance was mentioned, and it's a real one. For me, it's like, congratulations, you are in the worst case scenario, your project succeeded a lot. If you are super successful and the whole company depends now on your tool because you automate it very, very well, you will have to pay this new opportunity cost of maintaining every time the product is not working. Every time the automation is not working because there is a security issue, because whatever you were using is down, etc., you will have to stop what you were doing to fix the automation. It may depend. Some teams will take ownership altogether of this new automation, but I've seen cases where, like, yes, you end up as the person in charge of that. Earlier, I mentioned rigidity. Rigidity is bad, but it can have an even worse impact, which is that people say, okay, it's rigid, so I'm not going to improve the task. Because that would be painful. I would need to go to Fred and ask him to change the automation, or I would need to learn about this language and change the script. So I'm just not going to improve the thing at all. I'm saying it's pernicious because sometimes it's multiple people having small ideas that are not worth completely changing the automation on their own. But if you were aware of all this idea of improvement, you may decide that it's actually extremely valuable to just break the automation and write a new one with all the improvements in it. Once again, I have no solution, but it's good to keep in mind. One thing I don't like with this idea of time shaved off, time spent, is that not all times are equal. There was yesterday a presentation about neurodiversity and the fact that some people have ADHD. And when you have ADHD, some days you will hyper-focus on something and be super productive. And some days you are not able to focus at all and you try to do whatever you can. A manual repetitive task doesn't require any focus. You can do it if you are tired. You can do it if you are on a bad brain day. You can do it if it's Friday and you're about to leave. You just have 20 minutes. You can do 20 minutes of manual task. Writing down an automation requires you to concentrate well for the same amount of time. So we are shaving off low focus time and using some high focus time, which might not always be the best exchange to have. Does it make sense? Okay. Once again, don't hesitate to raise a hand if you have any disagreement with what I say. Since slides with a lot of disagreements are coming later. But if you are strong-willed enough to avoid the sunken cost fallacy and accept that you failed, now you have to deal with failure, which might be bad for your morale. Just like doing something very quickly was very good for your morale, failure will be bad for your morale. And if you spend too much time trying to chase the automation, you might not have a backup plan now. You were trying to automate the release of your product. The release had to be on Friday. It's Friday morning. You didn't manage to do it. You're not going to release on time. That's bad. So you should always, if you start doing an automation and you're not sure that you're going to do it, you have to factor in the backup plan. And same for your morale. Don't do it if you're very, very down and could not afford to fail. And this one could be controversial, depends on you. But I always say that you should not be too good at something you do not want to be your job. I'm speaking from experience in companies that do no longer appear in my CV because, yes, that's exactly what happened. Like, I was very good at stuff that I didn't want to be doing. And because I was the best at them, I was in charge of them. And yes, if you start automating a lot, people are going to go see you and say, hey, Fred, I had this idea of automation. Could you do it? And if you like it, it's great. It's a benefit. If you don't like it, it's a cost that you should take into consideration. And that's it for my cost. Did I miss any?
If people start relying on the automation, it might also be that they lose know-how, how to do the thing in the first place that got automated. And that might be relevant.
Yes, indeed. It probably plays a bit in rigidifying the behavior, like they don't understand what's happening behind, so they no longer have ideas to improve. But yeah, it's a nice one, yes. So I presented a ton of reasons to automate, a ton of reasons not to automate. And we still have this question of, should I automate this time for this problem? And all I can tell you is that, yes, if you automate, you will no longer do any manual error, but you will do bugs instead. Yes, you will rerun the same script multiple times for free, but you will introduce some uncertainty about whether you can do it. You might reach moving targets, but you have to be careful of certain fallacy. The result can be shared, but if you share too much, you will have tooling fatigue. You will better understand the process, but you will make it more rigid in the process. It can be a good base for future automations, but you are paying now for free time in the future. You are learning new technologies, but also putting some maintenance on yourself. You are changing behaviors, but perhaps you are also rigidifying behaviors. You will have less repetition and boring tasks, but it will have some mental cost. It will be fun, but it might fail. And it's a good morale boost, but you become the automation person in the room. So now, what do we do? At first, I wanted to write down a very complex formula that would kind of be jokingly everything I put here. Then I realized I didn't have the energy to do that. But yes, so the formula is super complex. I think we can still extract, that's where I expect you to disagree with me on some of the points, but I think we can still extract a few parameters that we should take into consideration. The first one is how stable is the task we are trying to automate? And so I made this little chart. I'm gonna just drop this. On one side it's completely unstable. It changes all the time. On the other one, it's perfectly stable. And here is do not automate. And here is, yes, automate. So what do you expect on this, like something like that? So the first one is really easy one. In my opinion, the only reason to automate is if it's completely stable. But there is a trick. It's that what is stable or not really depends on how you see the problem. If every day you need to compare all your value on column H against a different number, on one side it's unstable, it changes every day. On the other side, if you put a parameter with the number you're comparing with, you now have a completely stable automation with a parameter. So sometimes you have an unstable problem, but you can extract some slightly smaller problem that is completely stable. And that's the one we have to chase and automate away. Same, if you have like 10 steps in your process and 8 of them are easy to automate and 2 of them are very hard, you just automate the 8 that you can automate away and keep the other 2. Are you trying to fix an urgent problem? And I'm saying urgent as in one shot, like there is a demo at the end of the week. Not there is a demo at the end of every week and we are always in an emergency. So on one side is we are bored and there is absolutely no emergency. On the other side is my CEO is standing behind me and shouting. So what would you do? You see you? In my opinion, it's like that. If there is no emergency at all, you automate. The more urgent it is, the less I want to automate because I'm afraid that I'm not certain of the time it's going to take. And so it may fail, and I will have to find a backup. And because it's urgent, I don't have that much time to backup. So that was my first reaction, at least. But then a colleague proposed a change, which is like that. Because at some point, things are so urgent that actually they are desperate. And you realize you're not going to do it in time by hand. And that's a time where you want to try to automate away, because if it fails, it's exactly the same situation as before. If it succeeds, you're a legend. So at some point, the chart probably bumps a bit. You know. Do you agree or not? You didn't? Okay. You accept it? Yeah.
I think maybe if it's completely not urgent, it might not even be worth automating. So maybe the left side is also low.
Yes, many of these charts are drawn with my vision of what is fun. So when I don't care, I'm like, okay, I might as well automate, that will be fun. But indeed, if you do not think it's fun, is also down on the left, indeed. Now the opposite. For example, I am releasing products. I want to be absolutely sure that every time we release, we go through the test, of course, and we upload the right version that has been stripped correctly, that has been, I don't know, that went through the antivirus, etc. So if you want to be sure that something is repeatable, I think it makes sense for everybody that if it's very important, we want to automate it. Because manual errors, the more you repeat the task, the more chances you have to do a manual error and release something that you were not supposed to release, which can be super costly for the company. I also worked in a company at some point where if you asked for 10 machines for your CI, which were supposed to be absolutely identical, it would take you 10 times as long as having one, because they were all manually handcrafted one by one, which means that you asked for 10 machines and 8 were strictly identical, 1 didn't work at all, didn't start, and 1 had just 1 typo in one of the paths, so that once every 5 years, tests would start failing only on this machine, and you had to realize, oh, it's not an unstable test, it's an unstable machine in the pool. Same thing, it doesn't make sense in that kind of case where you want exactly the same thing all the time to not automate. Nobody seems to disagree. And yes, I had the little bump at the very beginning, same. It's fun to automate. If nobody cares about the result, automate. Ah. Okay, so if you need to repeat it very often, but it's completely unimportant, people are going to forget how to do it. And so having an automation will also keep a documentation. Ah, if you don't repeat it, okay. But, yes. This one was, okay, because this one was when you repeat. But indeed, if you do not repeat, it's coming. Don't spoil the next chart. Before that, familiarity. I just put one word, so it can be familiarity with the task you are trying to automate, or familiarity with the technology you would use to automate. On one hand is, I know nothing about it. On the other hand is, I'm an expert. I would draw 2 completely different graphs. One is, if there is high pressure, it needs to be very well done for some reason. I'm only going to automate if I know exactly what I'm doing. On the other hand, if there is very low pressure, that's where I want to automate to learn about the new technology, to learn about the process and have this automation. And now we know how to do it because as I learned, I wrote down these scripts that describe exactly what's happening, etc. In reality, I think all the charts I drew should have all the parameters because they all interact with each other. But for this one, I think it really completely changes the meaning. So that's the one you were talking about. Are we talking about one very large task that happens very rarely, or a lot of small tasks that happen very often? So what would you draw there? Floor is full. I personally draw something like that. So the idea is, on the very left hand is exactly what this person was saying, which is like, if you don't do it often, you want to automate it because if you don't do it often and it's big, you want to automate it because that's a way to learn how it works, get the big picture, save the big picture, because in 3 months when somebody else will need to do it, they do not need to relearn everything about this task. And it's also where you can change the behavior. Perhaps this huge task is done very rarely because it's very long and very large. And perhaps if it's a one-liner, they're going to use it every day. On the other hand of the spectrum is super repetitive small task, which is where you get repetitive strain injuries. This is where you do manual errors because you repeated something too much. And also it's going to be fun to automate that away. And in the middle, you have this middle tasks that you repeat middle amount of time that are less valuable to automate probably. How many people are repeating this same task? Is it just yourself? Is it a pizza team, so a team of 4 to 8 people, I think? Depends on how hungry you are with the pizza. And on the very end is the whole company, which could be Google or something huge. I would draw two graphs here. If you love automating, you take the green one, because you will end up with something that you can share with more and more people, and it's valuable. You are improving everybody's life, everybody is grateful for you. If you do not want to become the automation person, if you do not want to end up with maintenance and knowledge about the task that is completely cursed, but you are the only one knowing about it because you are the one writing the automation, you take the red one, which is, I think, it's always useful in your team because newcomers, etc. After that, you are putting yourself in a new position that you might not like. Same, depends. Perhaps in your company, you can just give the ownership to somebody else afterwards and go on. So these were a few of the axes that I try to take into consideration when I think whether it's useful or not to automate. But there are a lot of stuff that cannot really be predicted, like, will it be feasible? We'll see. Will there be any bugs? Of course not. I don't write bugs, but will I need to rerun something that I thought was one shot? Same, of course not, because I don't make mistakes, but it did happen in the past. And managers have these statistical tools that they use to say that, okay, at the level of the company, above all employees, everybody is going to miss by this percentage, etc. So they can predict on large numbers what's going to happen. Just like I know that if I flip a coin, half of the result will be on one side and half on the other side. If I'm about to flip a coin, it still doesn't give me any information. And it's the same here. You're in front of the automation, probabilities of something failing, etc., don't really help you to take the decision. There are also other parameters that I didn't mention. One is office politics, which I didn't mention because it depends on your office. But in some places, it's a bad idea to automate for everybody because nobody cares. You spend a lot of energy and nobody counts. In some other places, it's the opposite. People are so happy when you automate anything that you will start automating anything for no reason. And hopefully you're not in any of these and you don't have to take it into account. Another one is ethics, which I do not put in benefits or costs, but I think it kind of trumps everything else. If you are trying to automate somebody's job away, probably don't do it. Don't care how much time you are shaving off. If you are trying to automate so that a disabled person is able to do the tasks that they cannot do otherwise, do it. I don't really care if it takes more time than doing it manually. So I think if ethics is in the formula, it should kind of trump all the other ones, but it doesn't happen that often. And now that we know that we can't really know whether it's valuable or not, I'm going to propose some approaches that you can take. One is just if you have this process you're trying to automate, which is just a number of bullet points, you should start by documenting perfectly the process. What are we doing, in which order, etc. What are the exceptions? And this documentation is already kind of an algorithm which you can start automating when you have time to automate one point of the bullet point. And then you continue working, and when you have some free time, you start working on another point of the bullet point. And when you've automated 2 successive points, you can just merge the 2 scripts into one, and now you've automated away one. And with time, you will end up with a one-liner. And hopefully it doesn't, you always do it at times when you have enough free time. It's not hurting the business or anything, so it's, you end up with something good over a long time. Another approach I would take is, for example, I'm trying to automate the release process. It takes us 2 days of hard work to release. We need to release on Friday, it's Monday. I can just say, okay, I'm gonna spend 3 days trying to automate. After 3 days, we are gonna see where we are. If we have automated everything away, we are good, we're done. If we didn't, perhaps we have a small script that automates part of it away. Perhaps we have nothing except a new knowledge of what the problem is, which we can write down. But no matter what happens, we have enough time to fall back on the manual approach and release in time. And so instead of thinking of how much is it gonna need for me to automate, the reflection is just how much can I spend without it being a problem. And you try and you see if it was enough or not to automate the process away. And yes, a few of my points were just you and yourself, asking yourself, do I want to become the automation person? Do I want to do this automation that seems fun to implement, etc.? I think you should take this into consideration if it's a task that you are thinking to automate by yourself. Of course, if your manager is asking you to automate it, it's a different subject. But if you are thinking about this with yourself, and you want or you do not want, follow your heart. It's probably the best solution most of the time. Or at least listen to your heart. And if you want to automate and your managers want to micromanage you and do not want you to automate, perhaps you can show them this presentation to convince them that yes, it's going to take a little bit more time, but it's worth it. And that's it for my list of things.